Hello, welcome to the industry's first ever AI Ops Summit. My name is Kieran Taylor. I lead marketing for CA Technologies' Agile Operations business unit. We provide solutions for monitoring and advanced analytics. I really enjoyed our last session with our site reliability engineering experts, Todd Polino of LinkedIn and David Blank-Edelman, author and SREcon co-founder. In some ways, it feels like SREs represent the evolution of IT operations. And next up, I think we've got a real-world example of the convergence of code, cloud, and operations. That's in containerized applications and microservices. They can really speed deployment, but at the same time, they can be extremely noisy from a monitoring standpoint. And we're lucky to have two experts that deal with container chaos on the front lines. Joined by Scott McCarty, who's a principal product manager for containers at Red Hat. At Red Hat, Scott, you gather market requirements from a broad group of IT professionals, customers, partners, et cetera, for all aspects of Linux containers. I'm also joined by Paul Maddocks. Paul is with Barclays Bank in the UK. Paul's responsible for production and ownership of middleware solution designs. That includes leading technologies like containers. So let's start with Scott. Scott, if you could help us outline how these environments are different and how OPENSHIFT provides a platform for agility for operations, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just have a few slides that I want to kind of run through, but you know, like I think it all starts with like a really different mindset around how you do IT in general. It's around the idea that really, if you think about devs and architects and sysadmins, we're really encouraged to think differently and think about consuming from a value chain and providing new value. And that providing new value can really be kind of two things. It can either be trimming bottom line costs, which is traditional IT, we're used to doing that. But there's also kind of this new concept of hunting top line revenue. And that's a very different thing than I think most IT operations people have historically been comfortable with. And so, you know, specific to a bank, this could be, loaning people money in a new way, like some microtransaction, something like that. But then the IT that supports that, so like kind of all the way down that value chain to provide something quickly that we can experiment with. So I kind of walk through, you have to, as a product manager, what you really have to think about is where you're going to provide value, right? And then how you're going to leverage that value chain that already exists, because you don't want to waste time on commodities, and especially with the needs of competing with your competitors who are doing the same thing. At the end of the day, you have to kind of consume what's already available and then provide value where you're going to provide value in that niche, without actually reinventing the entire wheel of that supply chain. So, specific to a bank, you want to think about, so say you're a product manager and you're trying to loan, new money in a new way. You really have to kind of leverage technical resources, because almost everything is based on technology in some way. And, that's typically programmers and data scientists, things like that. And these are very finite resources that are very high in demand as well.
Sure.
And so you end up with, they have to leverage a value supply chain, which includes, code. And in this drawing in particular, I show, from functions all the way down to open source libraries, right? And at some point, containers kind of end up becoming kind of the nexus of that. That's where it kind of all comes together in an operational manner. Mm-hmm. But really, your app's probably going to be made up of a lot of different things. And so the second piece of that, so the first part is code, right? You're going to have to consume code, but the second part is data. And so when you really think through like what the rich value chain looks like, a lot of the time in a cloud provider or even in a cloud-like environment like OpenStack, you have higher level data structures like buckets of data and things like that. And so you want to start to think about consuming from these higher level kind of resources. And as an operations person trying to provide new value in that internal marketplace, essentially, you have to start thinking about what kinds of resources you're going to provide. It's not just, here's a volume anymore. And now it's, all right, here's a system that's multi-tenant that provides buckets to different tenants within our environment. And that becomes, and then even thinking about that over a life cycle, which I'll get into next. So you kind of look at, what does a life cycle look like, right? And this is one that I want to point out really crisply. One of the most important things that you have to do as a product manager is think about how long you're going to provide value in the marketplace. And then I always say, let that sink in. Like, how long are you going to provide value? And then how long is what you provide going to actually have value? Because value is temporal, right, in nature, and it fades over time. And then when you're consuming from that supply chain, think about how often is that stuff I'm consuming, or how long is that stuff I'm consuming going to provide value from who I'm buying it from? Because once it stops providing value, they're going to stop providing it.
Right.
And that's a very different model than traditional IT, where traditional IT was just handcuffed. They would have to provide value for as long as you told them they had to. But cloud providers aren't going to do that for you. That's just not going to happen. As soon as they stop making money off of it, they're going to stop providing value, or they're going to have a very short window to get rid of that. And so tracking all of those things is a new world of product management thinking that is really pretty novel, I think, for IT operations in general, and for even honestly, lenders, people that even business operations people. So finally, kind of bring it all together into so how do you solve this, right? Like at the end of the day, you're probably going to be consuming functions, APIs, and then creating your own code, your own technologies that's typically based in code. And so, if you think about it, a container platform is really the market maker for all of this. It's what helps kind of provide gravity for a set of third-party vendors that provide value within it. A place for you to run your code, a place for you to consume functions, a place for you to consume APIs, and a platform for all of that to kind of happen. And it's also a good place, within that gravity to kind of have automation that's attached to it. So, like for example, with OPENSHIFT, we recently released something called the operators paradigm. And that is essentially think of it as a new way of thinking about how third parties integrate in a container platform, in that they can now release their software within that environment and have it be, day two operations are already taken care of. So like normally if you do like an OC new app, there's like a single command you can run in OPENSHIFT to basically fire up an app. Day one, that's really easy. But then 30 days later, what do you do? Like, what do you do when the database needs backed up, or or it gets its schema corrupted in some way? The idea of this operators paradigm is the software vendor, whether it's an internal, again, product manager, or an external third party that you buy from, they can provide this operator along with the code, and now it's manageable over an infinite, or a longer term, I don't want to say indefinite, probably not infinite, but an indefinite amount of time. So this is great, right? So now we have a container platform. We have a good foundation for consuming from third parties, value chain, whether it's code or third-party pieces of software that help support the platform. That's great, but now we're moving a lot faster. And what happens when you move faster? You end up leaving a lot more dead bodies. So, at the end of the day, we saw this with virtualization. We saw it with physical infrastructure before. But now it's really, we can see how this is going to get worse as we end up consuming APIs, and we have leftover deprecated APIs, and we have certain role-based access controls for specific APIs accessing specific data, and all of the metadata wrapped around that controlling access to different things. That's we're going to move quick, and we're going to leave a lot of that behind, and then managing all that over time is going to require a lot more automated systems thinking. And so that's where the AI ops comes in. Have a container platform, have something that can help you think through, and leverage as much of that as you can to basically get to basically being able to manage your life cycle of your product and where you're going to provide value. So that's kind of my intro.
Wow.
Why container platform, why AI ops.
Well, let's go over to Paul. We'll have some time at the end for some questions. Paul, for those that haven't spent any time in the UK or don't follow English club football, can you give an overview of who Barclays is?
Yes, certainly. We'll just move on to the first slide. So Barclays is a multinational bank, very, very large, and a very long history. They've been established for around 327 years. So kind of touching on what Scott's brought up there, you can imagine we've left a lot of dead bodies in terms of IT. So we've got a huge history there and a huge legacy estate that we're now bringing up to current terms, really. And we're trying to establish how we evolve with technology to meet the needs of the business. So that gives you some perspective of the size and where we've come from. What I'd like to do is try and highlight where we're currently at, and then walk you through the journey of how we've been able to get there with the help of AI ops. When we set out on this journey, we knew we had to try and establish a solution for the platform operational team and the application DevOps teams to be able to get a clear focus of their service. So from an operational perspective for the platform, they needed to ensure that platform was up and running 100% of the time, right, and servicing the needs of their customers. The app teams themselves needed an ability to self-serve, the information required to be able to perform the analytics, to understand exactly what's going on their applications that is running or that are running on the environment itself. And then historically, it was quite a shift, because in the older legacy world, we had some clearly identified roles and responsibilities for these types.
Pretty rigid too.
Yeah, very much so. We had dedicated teams performing dedicated functions. Moving towards cloud, that evolved and had to evolve with this type of workload. So we had to ensure that whatever solution we were bringing forward could then evolve with that particular role, to allow those DevOps teams to be able to self-serve that information. And that involved, if you imagine historically, as you touched on earlier, Scott, someone would own a physical piece of kit and that was their baby, and they'd keep that for the rest of their term, really. Whereas now we're moving to a multi-layered environment, multi-tenant, where the guys need to be able to have a view of that full stack. So the solution we were going to provide had to enable that for them. And to do that, we had to come up with a solution that was able to tie back using a consistent naming approach. So in terms of the analytics of the applications in the estates, we had to ensure that the end user teams were able to quickly identify what was theirs. You imagine in a multi-tenant environment, containers especially, you were spinning up on random nodes across the estate. You don't know where you're going to live, so you need something that can tie all that back together and allow you to analyze. So the journey we've been on is started out for us really around 2014, and that was where we dipped our toes into the water, to where we're at now, 2018, where we've got hundreds of nodes across the estate, multi-data centers across the globe, thousands of applications running, thousands of containers.
Like how many thousand? Ballpark.
Yeah, we're looking around 2,500 containers.
Wow.
In our pilot environments. When you move across the full estate, we're looking around 20,000 plus containers. That's across our development environments and production estate. So it's quite a significant sprawl, and quite something that's quite difficult to get your hands around and really control. So we knew straight from the start, really, we needed to integrate monitoring solutions and analytic solutions into our delivery pipelines. So we've always had that within our mindset throughout our journey. So getting through to 2018, we're in a fairly good place, which I'll walk you through. Some of the challenges we faced when we first set out on the journey was not only technology challenges, it was around mindset within the business itself. So you can imagine, I touched on early, people were very controlling, it was their little environment. We had to evolve that mindset, and that was across the stack of people, really, from developers right the way through to our security teams. Operationally, we're bringing on board that multi-tenancy understanding, application resilience, so we had to integrate some enforced practices to shape behaviour of people as we went forward, and some of that included financial. So for instance, if people were starting to have bad practice around sprawl, we needed data to understand exactly what they were doing, be able to analyse that data and start charging back as a result of that bad behaviour. How we done that? So adoption really was the big one for us. We had to kind of evolve from an IT operational more to an AI ops, if that's even a thing, really. But basically what that means is grabbing hold of that data and being able to fully understand what's going on in your environment and having the tools that would enable you to be able to do that. So like I touched on earlier, we had 20,000 plus containers running in the estate. So you need some form of machine learning. That human cannot possibly do that themselves, and that estate is continually growing. So we had to use things like metadata, tagging of containers, and bringing that all back together for the end users. That allows them to correlate everything they're running, and that's across the stack, so from their application to the container to the OpenShift environment down to the operating system, right through to the virtual environment they're running in, so they can fully understand and build that trust in exactly what they're running. And combined with that as well, you need that first level of support. So with all of these solutions, they kind of fall flat on their face if your NOC team do not have a view of what's going on across the estate. They're the guys who get that call when things go wrong, the first instance. So as part of the solution we developed, we've ensured that all the plumbing is there to present a view of our full cloud estate with all the monitoring information on a nice single pane of glass, and they can then make the necessary calls to the relevant teams to resolve any issues that may arise. So our end state now, I won't walk you through exactly where we're at there, but basically we have a fully automated deployment of APM as part of our pipeline. So what we've done now, our estate is continually growing, almost daily in some instances, because of the success of the platform. And then historically, we had our guys who were manually rolling out APM solutions. We were able to work with CA on a partnership program to help develop the OpenShift monitoring agent and the infrastructure agent. And what that's allowed us to do is utilize daemon sets to effectively roll out an APM agent whenever a new node is provisioned. So that's removed a significant overhead away from our guys who are having to historically manually roll out this type of
So that's just
software.
baked into your provisioning process? The instrumentation's just part of the way that it rolls out?
Correct. So
Wow.
as soon as a new node's provisioned, nobody even considers monitoring now because it just happens.
Right.
And it's there. And the same for the dev teams themselves. Whenever they're rolling out apps, if they want to utilize the APM solution to see that full stack monitoring, they can hard bake that into their pipelines, self-service. They don't need to talk to a human. They've got full end-to-end monitoring of their solution immediately. What we've seen from this, we've seen a couple of instant benefits. Historically, if I go back to the early days when we started rolling out these solutions, we were able to identify a problem that we didn't even know was in the estate. And the APM solution quickly identified that. We were able to get our engineering teams back on to resolving the issue and improve productivity quite significantly. Jump forward to 2018, we're seeing different problems whereby more bad behaviour with customers, whereby they were still stuck in that old mindset. So when they would land on a platform, they would be allocated a quota, and what they would do is they would hard bake the quota. So they would physically grab hold of as much capacity as they could, even though they were not using it.
Sure.
So we were able to use APM to analyse exactly what was going on our estate, and in all seriousness, in the development environment, we were able to identify a 50% reduction. So we were over, we had capacity over 50% beyond what we actually needed. And alongside that, we were also able to identify with quotas. We were enforcing quotas on almost everything that we thought we needed. What we found, again using APM, was one of our customers were using jobs, so they were scheduling jobs that we weren't aware was actually happening, and we forgot to put a quota on it effectively. So this one customer had 11,000 containers running in one project, all in error, and we didn't know it was happening until we implemented the monitoring suite, and we were able to correct that bad practice.
Can you define, sorry to interject, can you define a customer in that scenario?
Yeah, so it's internal customers for us. So for instance, we would have the operational team who would look after the cloud platform, so the OpenShift platform. Our customers we would deem as a development team and an operational team who would be writing and deploying an application to run on that platform, something that would service our external customers. So for instance, our online banking platform would be an application that would run on OpenShift.
Okay. And you've piqued my curiosity. So what's the advantage of squirreling away 10,000 containers? Like, what's the motivation there?
Basically, we have set quotas and set charging for the platform. And if somebody is over quota and we're not able to control that, that has a negative effect on the rest of people using the platform. So we have to bring them back in line. And if they've got a legitimate reason for that, then quotas can be increased, but we also need to facilitate that capacity on the estate as well, and ensure that, one, are they running on the right platform, or do they need something different to service their needs?
Right.
So it's more about just analysing that data and ensuring that we know exactly what's running on the platform, and what is running on the platform is the correct thing that should be there.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's pretty much.
That's your last slide. So before we go to the next session, we've got, looks like about 6 minutes for some questions and answers. Maybe I'll start with you, Scott.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to companies that are moving towards a consumption-based model?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would think about is along the life cycle that I mentioned. So broadly, think about how long you're going to provide value in the market,
Right.
and then think about the supply chain that you leverage and how long they view their product as providing value, because they're making money off that, and if they're not making money, they're not going to provide it. So like that's something that's fundamentally different. Again, like people aren't used to that. It's painful. That's sort of the piece that really clicks in people's brain when they realize, oh, this is not my old Solaris box that's been around for 12 years, and I just keep paying. Oh, the support's out, but just let it keep running. Like that doesn't exist when you're consuming APIs and services, and these things just go away, or they get upgraded and they come to a new version, and you have to change your app. You have no choice, and so build that into your model as you're thinking about how you're going to maintain that over time. Another thing I would think about is around the open source nature of things. So consume at the highest level down to the lowest level if you can. Always have a bias towards consumption at the highest level. Consume a function or an API if you can, or build an API if one doesn't exist. And then in that API, make it run in a container, and then consume existing software. So for example, this is a Red Hat pitch to an extent, but Red Hat's really good at packaging software in containers. And so if you can consume one of our containers, great, do that. If not, then build your own container. If you can't do that, from existing Red Hat packages, fine, then go download open source libraries. But now remember, you've now taken control over that value chain yourself, and now, again, you have to manage how long is that upstream community going to support something, blah, blah, blah. It's the same concept, whether it's open source or whether it's from a vendor. Yeah. But at least with the Red Hat model, we've been used to that value chain and that timeline. We've always provided very good timelines over how long we support things. Yeah. And so, but those are two important things I'd probably hammer on.
Paul, you mentioned some of the challenges. You've got 20,000 plus containers and kind of mapping ownership across those containers. Does that relate at all to Scott's previous point about deprecation and kind of understanding? Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, very much so. So again, some history there. If we go back to the old way of thinking, somebody would pay for some physical kit, they would deploy their application on there, and that would be theirs forever, effectively, until that application died. Going forward, we're on cloud now, we've got these containers running, and some of these are up and down constantly. We needed a mechanism to identify exactly who owns. So if you imagine with containers, they'll spin up with random names, random projects, and initially it was difficult to understand who was doing what. So if we look at that case of the project running 11,000 containers, if we didn't have a mechanism to be able to identify who they were, we'd have no control and be able to prevent that from happening. So we wouldn't know could we just turn that application off, or is that servicing our external customers is very important. So internally we developed a mechanism that automatically labelled through metadata all of our containers to establish exactly who owns them and the person or the support team that we need to be able to contact to resolve any issues. So certainly is very, very important having that.
Sure, yeah, I can imagine. If you had to start all over again, what would you do differently? Any lessons learned?
Yeah, good question. Quite a few lessons learned. We're happy with the products we've picked. It's more about how you approach the deployment and the original design, I'd probably say. So initially when we first set out on this journey, we were quite naive, as most people probably are, to be fair.
Fair, yeah.
And we allowed almost any product to be run on the environment, regardless of owner. And that was, again, quite naive, because as the world moved forward and hacks started to take place a lot more and become mainstream news, You then realize these products need to be patched, they need to be managed in correct product management methodology. And when you've got different owners running different products on your platform that you're offering out to end users, if you're not in control of that, you've suddenly got a vulnerable product.
Right.
And something that, one, can't be monitored, you can't get any insight into exactly what's running in there. So I'd say from day one, we would obtain control on exactly what runs the platform. We've had to evolve that over time, and because of that legacy approach initially, that's taken us quite some time to get to where we are now, because we've had to decommission over a period of time those particular applications. So going forward now, we've got that approach whereby if an application or a product does land on our environment, then it must have this monitoring inbuilt, so we can obtain clear insight. It must have some resilience built into it, and we must have correct product management, so vulnerabilities must be managed whenever a vendor releases something new.
Sure.
So it's just that mindset on how you approach things.
Yeah, and that kind of circles back to your presentation, thinking about it from a product manager standpoint, and you own the totality of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're just about out of time, but thank you very much, especially you, Paul, for making the 7-hour trip across the pond. I just did it last week, and it's a long flight. The conversation continues. So on Twitter, we've got hashtag AIOps Summit, and you can engage with Paul and Scott via that channel. Next up, we've got a demonstration from Brian Whitmarsh, who leads our product management team for AIOps offerings. Brian's going to, incidentally, we use containers to deploy our own APM solution, and Brian's going to demonstrate that particular solution here in just 2 minutes' time. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Paul. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having us.